This is a matter of deen. This ilm is a matter of deen. You be careful who you take your deen from.
We understand also from this hadith the benefit of the one who is continuously going to the masjid, that he will be also on that day under the shade of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when there is no shade except his shade, subhanahu. This person, his heart is attached to the masjid. Whenever he goes out of it, because of his love in remembering Allah and in establishing the salah and in praying to Allah, his love for the tilawah, for the recitation of Quran, his love for ruku', for bowing, his love for sajda, his love for tasbih and tahmeed and tahleel and takbir, makes it so that no sooner that he steps out of the door of the masjid, then his heart is constantly connected to it, and he wants to run back to the masjid. We also understand from this narration that love, al-hub, yambaghi an yakun fillah, that our love must be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for some temporary benefit, limaslahatin za'ila, not for some temporary benefit or some benefit, worldly benefit, but that the love that must be there is the love that is purely for the pleasure of Allah. We also understand from this hadith the virtue of being chaste, of guarding one's modesty, of not falling into fornication or adultery. Fornication, the individual who has never been married ever in their life commits an act of fornication. This individual under Islamic law, with all conditions being met, should be lashed, as in Surah An-Nur, or adultery, which is in Islam means that you have ever been married. If you have ever in your life been married, not that you're married at the time that you commit illegal sexual intercourse with the woman or with the man, but if you have ever in your life been married, that is called adultery. And if the conditions are met in Islam, that individual is stoned. So the importance of the one who all conditions have been met there for that individual. The atmosphere is provided. There is nothing physical that stops the individual from committing the act which displeases Allah. The woman is beautiful and she has money. The place is secluded. No one from the creation sees except the angels or maybe jinn. The atmosphere is there. The individual wants to commit the act. Yet, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear of Allah, fear of the one who created him, created her, and brought them into existence. Fear of the one who is constantly watching, and constantly witnessing, and constantly recording the deeds of his servants, and will surely call him to account for that, makes the individual state, I fear Allah, and walk away from that. This individual will be under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a day that there will be no shade except shade provided for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It shows also the virtues of being aware of Allah and the virtues of fearing Allah inwardly. That khashya, fear of Allah, doesn't benefit unless it's inward. Unless it's inward. Wallahi, by Allah, outward humility and piousness does not benefit anyone and does not deceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is important is that the individual inside, in their heart, truly fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that when the call comes from the desire or from the whispering of the shayateen, whether they be from men or whether they be from jinn, that the heart that is full of iman says, La, wallahi la, no, I will not disobey my Lord. No, I will not act which is displeasing to my Lord. For this individual, he will be under the shade of Allah, the shade of the throne of Allah, that day where there will be no shade except the shade provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر لي ولكم فاستغفروه. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Another understanding or benefit we get from this narration is the benefits of crying. The benefits of crying about our actions, about our misdeeds. The benefits of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're alone, in seclusion, when there's no one around that we're trying to impress, when there's no one around that we're trying to show an outward piety in front of, but it is just us in seclusion. We think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His blessings upon us and His mercy upon us and His love for us, that He guided us to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, the only path that leads to His Jannah and leads to His pleasure. And we think about Allah and how patient He is with us, that we disobey Him, yet He still has mercy upon us and still provides for us and still blesses us. This individual who thinks about Allah, remember Allah, and he can't control himself, or she can't control herself. The tears start to flow from the eyes because the heart remembers Allah, reflects upon Allah, and this person is alone. And Allah Ta'ala knows the sincerity of this individual. This individual is one of the types of individuals who will be under the shade of Allah on a day where there is no shade except the shade provided by Allah. We also understand from this narration the benefits of sadaqah that is done secretly. Sadaqah that is far removed from riyah, from being seen by people, or from sum'ah, from being heard by other individuals, that such and such person gave such and such amount to such and such situation, or for such and such people. No, this individual sadaqah is so hidden that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, even his left hand doesn't know what his right hand has spent. Even another part of his body does not know what another part of his body has spent. What about the people? What about those around him? He spends in this way because he wants his sadaqah to be for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He doesn't want for the people to see him doing this, to say that he's a righteous individual, for the people to say he's a philanthropist, for the people to say, look how much charity he gives. He gives it secretly, so secret that his left hand does not know what his right hand has given. What is the reward for such individuals? They will be under the shade of the throne of Allah the day when there is no shade except the shade provided for Allah. Everything in this hadith that is mentioned for a man this and for a man that includes the woman, except if you say that the position of imam adil is a ruler. In that case it does not include the woman, but her responsibilities that she fulfill in the house, if she's just in that, she can receive such a reward. Also, the situation of going to the masjid is particular of men, for if the woman prays in the most sheltered place of her house, the most secluded place of her house, her prayer there is better than in the masjid. And two men who love one another, and they only love one another, applies to women also, who love their sister, and they only love their sister for the love of Allah. Allah Ta'ala will say on the day of judgment, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Inna Allah Ta'ala, very Allah the Exalted, Yaqulu will say, Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of judgment, Aina mutahabbuna bi jilali, where are those who love one another for my glory, for my sake? Al-Yawma, this day, udhilluhum, I will give them, udhilluhum fi dhilli, I will give them shade from my shade. Yawma la dhilla illa dhill, Yawma la dhilla illa dhilli, Yawma la dhilla illa dhilli, the day that there will be no shade except my shade. So if we start and begin to love one another, not based upon nationalities, or based upon groups, or based upon parties, or based upon a political affiliation, or based upon language, but love one another for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we may be amongst those who will hear Allah ta'ala speak on the day of judgment, because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Yaqulu yawm al-qiyamah, that Allah will say on that day, Aina mutahabbuna bi jalali, where are those who love mercy, when everybody else is crying to the point that when the tears run out, they're crying blood, when people sweat has reached to the top of their mouths so that they can't say anything, when they are in this particular type of misery that we cannot imagine, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call those who love one another for His pleasure and will place them under the shade of His throne. A shade that there will be no shade except that shade for these types of individuals. We know that it is time for the hearts to awaken to the fact that loving for any other reason is destroying ourselves and destroying each other and destroying Islam. We must come to terms with this and understand that from today it's time to love one another, not for any other reason except for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.